Can you take a person, a child that has dyslexia, and then make them look as if they don't have dyslexia?
Very powerful question. A little complicated in how it's answered. So let me back up and just say, let's review. There's 3 criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia: reading accuracy, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. And this is based on the DSM-5. That is for professionals who are actually licensed to diagnose it. That's the criteria you're going to use.
So let's cover those again. What 3 are they?
It's reading accuracy has to be impaired.
So what does that look like for our parents to understand?
Okay.
What does reading accuracy look like?
It means you're not making lots of mistakes when you're reading words. You're able to both sound them out and you're able to remember and memorize sight words. Both systems are working equally strong. And the professionals will use standardized testing of how many sight words do you know compared to kids your age. And that's what the Wilcox-Johnson does, or the WIAT does, or the Pfeiffer does, or the WRMTR, any of these tests that are actually measures of what they call word identification, which means your ability to memorize and read words that cannot be sounded out.
Okay.
But the other part of accuracy is, can you sound out words? And this is a hallmark deficit. One of the main characteristics of children who fit into, and adults and teens who don't get remediation, fit into that criteria of dyslexia or reading accuracy problems is they're not accurate at sounding out words. They'll make 1 of 5 mistakes. And how professionals, meaning clinical psychologists, neuropsychologists, speech therapists who are all licensed to diagnose dyslexia, how they will measure it is they will give you a test of words to read that are words you've never seen before, and they're actually not even real. And by that, it means they don't have any meaning associated with them. But they do follow all of the conventions of typical English words. So they could be an English word, but they aren't. So they don't have consonants together that don't happen in real words. They don't have vowels combined in ways that don't happen in real English words. So they're what they call pseudo words or nonsense words, because it solely measures your ability to sound out a word. So they might have to look at a word and go snoisk, snoisk. What's a snoisk? Who knows? It's nothing. But did you sound out all the letters accurately? And did you produce all the sounds when you blended the sounds together? That is the act of reading. And so the individual who has dyslexia will most likely make 1 of 5 mistakes when they read. They'll add a sound that doesn't belong. So they might look at snoisk and say snoiskt. And they added another sound at the end when there wasn't a t at the end of the word. They might delete a sound that's supposed to be there. So they might look at snoisk and say, snois, and leave off the k. Or they might reverse 2 sounds. They might look at snoisk and say snoiks, snoiks, and they've now reversed the last 2 sounds at the end. They might also repeat a sound that twice. It's only supposed to be in the word once. Or they might substitute one sound for the other. They might look at snoisk and say smoisk and put a sound where there's supposed to be a sound, because the letter in the word is an N, not an M. And so those are ways that we look for accuracy in both reading individual sight words and accuracy in actually being able to sound out words. The other factor is reading fluency, which means as you're reading along a paragraph, how many words are you reading per minute, and what's your speed of reading? And there's different tests that measure that. Some tests measure fluency only by itself with nothing else. Some tests, like the GORT-5 or the Gray Oral Reading Test number 5, it measures your fluency and your accuracy and your comprehension all combined together. And we're just looking to see, is your speed of reading on par with individuals typical of your age with the years of educational experience you have had. Third part is reading comprehension. Can you read a paragraph and then answer questions that actually are accurate because you understood what the paragraph talked about? Or do you read a paragraph and you're just guessing? You have little to no understanding or recollection of what the story talked about. Some stories ask you just to answer questions. Some stories ask you to verbally retell it back to the examiner. Other stories ask just verbatim questions. What was the boy's name in the story? And you have to say, oh, that was Bob. Other stories say, higher reasoning questions like prediction, deduction, inference, conclusion. The story didn't really say, but they're asking you to think about the information and tell us, what do you think might happen next? Which is most likely, option A, B, or C? So there's different ways they actually might test comprehension. And again, that gives us a way to measure those 3 skills that are hallmarks of dyslexia. So the question was, do you ever cure dyslexia? Does it ever go away? Would there be a time when you actually don't meet that diagnostic criteria? And let me specify the 2 pieces. One, we know dyslexia is genetic. So it's a genetic predisposition, which means an increased likelihood that this left side of the brain that is really most likely wired for the phonological processing. And as you get spoken to as a child at birth and you keep getting spoken to up to age 4, typically your phonological processor is building from several sensory systems. It's not just acoustic. Educators have finally begun to realize that just doing acoustic-only auditory activities is not really going to change your phonological processing much, because that's not how the brain typically builds phonological awareness. It builds it from acoustic and from visual and from sensory information about what's happening with your mouth. So understanding how those parts come together, if you get assessed and you don't have a reading accuracy deficit, it's actually on par with your grade or IQ level, and your fluency now is on par with your grade or IQ level, and your reading comprehension is on par with your grade or IQ level, depends on what we're comparing it to, then scientifically and methodically with how the DSM-5 works, that professional cannot give you the diagnosis of dyslexia. They could say by history you've had it, but you currently don't show the behaviors that are required to be diagnosed with it. Genetically, are your kids more likely to have it? Yeah, absolutely, because we didn't do any gene therapy when someone successfully remediated dyslexia. So we have many, many examples of individuals being improved so much that they no longer meet the DSM-5 criteria, and that diagnosis has to be removed from a diagnostic assessment by a speech therapist who's licensed to diagnose dyslexia, removed by a clinical psychologist, a neuropsychologist who's licensed to diagnose dyslexia. And I keep really emphasizing that because many times parents are getting information from the school, and typically there's nobody in the school who's even licensed to diagnose. So they use these sidebar terms that someone has made up, like characteristics of dyslexia. Well, that doesn't mean anything because that's not the diagnosis, and the person talking about it isn't licensed to diagnose it anyway. So hard for many families to understand, because most adults with dyslexia, especially my age in the 50s or your age in the 40s, they never really got rid of their reading problems. So in their personal experience, dyslexia never went away. Other adults or other individuals got remediation at age 7, and they don't struggle and they no longer meet criteria. For example, in your case and situation, you got remediation age 45. Odds are we have you retested, you're not going to meet criteria any longer, because your accuracy, your fluency, and your comprehension are now, average or above average, closer to your IQ level.